big video for you today, the best drivers of 2025. I might have put the cat amongst the pigeons. By the end of this video, you will have a much better idea of which of these 2025 driver releases is best for your game. I've tested and retested over 25 different drivers in the past couple of months. I've tested them indoors, I've tested outdoors, I've even tested them in PGA tournaments to see how they stand up under pressure. I'm absolutely shattered, but it's time to give you my verdict. This year we've absolutely blown our budget and maximized our resources to make sure this is our most in-depth driver guide ever, providing you with the best possible information to inform your purchasing decisions. Speaking of which, if you do like any of the drives that you see in this video and you do want to make a purchase, we've put some handy links in the description below to provide you with the best prices in your region. I'm going to break things down into a few categories of looks, sound and feel, forgiveness, bang for your buck, and pure raw launch monitor data. So let's get started with the looks. I say this so often when I'm talking about looks, but they're so subjective. What I think looks great, you might hate, and vice versa. So I've decided to absolve myself of responsibility a bit this year, and we've put the power to the people. At Golf Monthly, we used our social media channels, and we put out a poll with pictures of every inline driver from all the major manufacturers that we've tested this year and wanted to see what you thought. We had an overwhelming response to that poll, and interestingly, every single driver we put out there had at least a couple of votes, which I think highlights the great overall look of this crop of 2025 drivers. But realistically, there were two that stood out. But firstly, before we get to those top two, in third place came the Srixon ZXi range of drivers. Now, I've seen loads of comments online about these. They seem to be very, very popular in the forums, and I like what they've done to smarten up the visual. One of my big problems with the ZX Mark II range was the matte smooth crown and how easily it smudged. Any sort of moisture you got on that club was so difficult to wipe off and always left a little bit of residue. We've now got this textured crown which looks absolutely brilliant. They've also gotten rid of a little bit of the banner strips from around the edge, the white banner strips from the previous model, so it just looks super clean. And interestingly, probably uniquely out of all these drivers, this is one of the only manufacturers that each model looks exactly the same from the playing profile position. Whereas many manufacturers kind of split their models, and they might have a smaller, more compact model in the lower spinning, better player market, if you like, and a larger footprint at the higher handicap end. Srixon have created the exact same head profile for each model, which I think I really like. So onto that top two that I was mentioning. In second place with 18% of the vote was the GT range from Titleist. Now this is oh so Titleist. It's very clean, it's very sophisticated, and while other manufacturers maybe highlight the technology in their clubs through the visuals, maybe exposing some parts of the driver, Titleist have actually gone down the other route. This is the first time they've gone away from all titanium construction. They've introduced their thermoform crown into the equation, but instead of highlighting that with a banner strip and highlighting that area of the crown that has changed, they've actually covered it up. They've filled in the gaps and smoothed out that crown to keep it really clean and really minimal. And that's based on feedback from Tour and from very, very loyal Titleist fans. And when you're onto a winner, why would you change it? You wouldn't repaint the Mona Lisa, would you? But the winner of the best looking driver for 2025 with an overwhelming 20% of the vote was the TaylorMade Qi35 range. And it's really difficult to dispute that. When I first saw this leaked, I saw it leaked early, like many of you may have done online, and I knew I was going to love it. I just immediately got kind of supercar vibes, the real premium carbon finish, and I love this new light grey colour they've gone with. It's unlike anything else really on the range, so it's a really good marketing strategy from TaylorMade as well, which will help this driver stand out. A couple of things I'm really pleased to see is a really sparing use of colour. There's barely any accent colour. There is a sort of a minimal light paley green, but you can hardly see it on the sole, and I think that's a really nice minimal use of color there. I love how clean the crown is. We've gone away from those banner strips that we saw on the likes of Stealth and Sim, and we've got that infinity crown which has remained, which I think looks really clean. And one thing I also love that they've kept is this little white line along the top edge there. There isn't much contrast between the black face and the grey crown, so just having that white line there really helps highlight face alignment and really helps you line that ball up. I really do think this is a standout product, and whilst there's some great looking drivers, all these other companies look like they're operating in 2025, which they are, while TaylorMade look like they're operating in 2050. Now we don't do a category for most improved in looks, but if we did, a little nod must go to the Wilson Dynapower range. They actually came in 4th overall, which is a really impressive performance, and they finally got a driver that can compete with anything else in terms of the visual. So those were your votes, and I think I'm inclined to agree, and I do think that Wilson deserves a little nod. But we're all different. We all look for different things in drivers, and unless your Srix's on, within those ranges of drivers, there's always some different looks and some different head shapes available. So I've got some recommendations on which drivers you might want to look at if you've got a very specific requirement. So if you prefer compact, clean, kind of pear-shaped heads, I'd be taking a look at the TaylorMade Qi35 LS, or maybe the Titleist GT3. But if you're looking for maximum footprint, size and confidence, you might want to look at, even though it's a rollover product, the Ping G430 Max 10K, the Callaway Elite X, or even the Cobra DS Adapt Max K. So for the purists or minimalists amongst you who like a clean, unfussy head, I would probably steer towards maybe the Titleist GT range, possibly the Srixon ZXi range, or even one particular model I like, which is the Callaway Elite Triple Diamond, really clean. So those of you who prefer maybe a brasher appearance, some visual tech on show, just some stimulus at the dress, I'd probably steer you down the route of maybe the Ping G440 range, which now features the carbon fly wrap crown throughout and the turbulators that have become familiar with Ping, or even the PXG Black Ops range. While there's a lot going on the crown, I think it really looks great. Another very subjective topic here, but onto sound and feel. Now these two are so closely linked. How a driver sounds has a massive effect on how it will feel at impact. Now some people prefer a very high-pitched ting, some people love that really low, dull thud. And from a feel point of view, some people prefer a really hard smack, while others prefer something a little bit softer. I sit somewhere in the middle, and I've picked a few out that I think hit just the right notes for me. So my first honourable mention for sound and feel is the Callaway Elite Triple Diamond. Now I'm a huge fan of this driver. The latest iteration of the AI Smart Face is the best for me. It's almost a bit of a throwback, softer feel, but that hides some pretty ferocious ball speed. It's quite a dull, muted sound, and I think Callaway has done a fantastic job with this individual model. My second honourable mention in sound and feel is the Cobra DS Adapt, the full range. What I love about this particular range is the minimal vibration or feedback you get at impact, and there's just a lovely mid-pitched acoustic. And one of the things I love most about this, it's great and consistent throughout the whole range. Now one that really took me by surprise here was the Tour Edge Exotic 725 range. Tour Edge has done a superb job in a number of categories, as you'll see, but the standout for me might just be the feel. It's very lively off the face, and that liveliness really shines through into the acoustic too. It makes a lovely mid-pitch ting, and it produces some excellent results on top of it. But the winner for me in sound and feel is the Titleist GT range. Now these things ooze class from every angle. The new proprietary matrix polymer that Titleist used for the thermoform crown section is absolutely remarkable. I actually did a test when I went down to Titleist and was fitted with this, where they deconstructed the driver and they had that crown section separate. They asked me to pick it up, and it felt just like a credit card. It was soft, light and malleable, and then they asked me to drop it on the desk, and it made a sound like a gong going off. It was completely counterintuitive. Don't ask me how it works, but it translates into the perfect pitch for me, and it is the best feeling driver I've ever used from Titleist, which is why it's come out in top in this category. So it's all very well having a driver that looks, sounds and feels great, but we need more than that. We need it to perform. And as I said at the start, we've gone to greater lengths than ever before to make sure we're doing the most accurate tests. So let me hand over to, well, myself at one of our testing venues to explain one of the ways we've done that. So we're here at Foresight Sports UK HQ in Guildford, where we come to do all of our data gatherings. We come here because we get to use the GCQuad launch monitor, which you find gives us really accurate reading. We've got a nice kind of sterile test environment in the bay there. And we also use the same ball throughout all of the clubs, so the Titleist Pro V1x, the 2025 version. But we've got one big change to our testing this year. We wanted to really isolate the performance of the heads, particularly in the driver category. So we're using a technology called all fit adapters. So basically what you get, we've sourced this from Over the Top Golf in Chichester, who do a great job with wholesaling this kind of equipment. You get this universal adapter that goes on the shaft that I want to use, which in my case is a Fujikura Ventus Black 6X. The universal adapter sits on like it would any normal adapter, but what you get from there is these clever little coupling pieces, and I've got the TaylorMade one in my hand. That then slots over this adapter. Now that is perfectly compatible with a TaylorMade head. We've got everything from Callaway all the way through to Tour Edge to do it, so I can use the same shaft throughout my testing. Really helps to isolate the head and get really quantifiable, comparable data. Now some will say that different heads will perform better or differently with different shaft profiles, and there may be some truth in that, but as I said at Golf Monthly, we've been working really hard to try and create the most accurate and reliable data pool we could, and by using the same shaft throughout testing, we felt this was the best way to isolate the head and determine true performance. So without further ado, here are the fruits of my labor. Here's the findings from all of my testing. Now there's an awful lot of information up on that screen, so feel free to pause and digest it at your will, but for now it's giving me a headache, so I'm going to move it on and we're going to talk about ball speed. So in terms of ball speed, it's probably important to note there was actually less than 5 miles per hour separating the bottom to top performer here, which says a lot about how far we've come in terms of consistency of production in drivers. But in first place for me was the Ping G440 LST, and that gave me an average of 173.5 miles per hour. So Ping have done a really good job in terms of freeing up weight using what they call their free hosel design. So drag some weight away from that area and align that CG closer to what they call the force line. So you're going to get more oomph behind the strike. And that's certainly what I was seeing in my strike, and it's clearly paying off. As I said, it was my quickest on average, albeit not by much. So in second place was the TaylorMade Qi35, the core model, the standard model if you like, and that was 0.1 of a mile an hour behind the Ping, 173.4 miles per hour on average. It was also the quickest for me last year, the Qi10, so we know TaylorMade do a really good job making quick drivers. So good consistent stuff from TaylorMade there. And in third place for me in terms of ball speed was the Callaway Elite Triple Diamond. Again, just another 0.1 of a mile an hour behind. So we're talking a very negligible difference between those three drivers. And there's so much to love about that Elite Triple Diamond. It's got a great feel. It's more playable and forgiving than the Triple Diamond model of last year and even the year before. And it is super, super quick, as you can see in that top three. So let's talk a little bit about spin now, and that's going to differ from player to player depending on your speed, depending on the delivery, as to whether you need a driver that's producing a lot of spin or a driver that's going to minimize that spin. So starting with more of the higher spinning drivers, if you need a little bit of spin to help keep that ball in the air, you might want to take a look at these. So in first place for me in terms of the driver that produced the most spin was the Tour Edge Exotics E725. Now, I was really impressed with this 725 range as a whole, with its sibling, the C725, which produces a lot less spin. But the proprietary Ridgeback design, and it's got a 10K MOI, it feels great, it's incredibly easy to launch, and that spin makes it very, very stable. In second place, just a little bit behind that, the Cobra DS Adapt Max K, that was producing about 3,324 revs per me on average. There's lots of discretionary weight that's been positioned at the back of that driver, increasing that MOI number and dragging the spin and stability up. And the third most spinny driver for me was actually the Callaway Elite X, and I was getting a spin number on average of 3,122 revs with that. Now it's a really interesting driver. The 10X AI Smart Face and adjustable 13-gram weight at the back create a really nice feel, and in particular in this driver, just give you that little bit of extra stability and spin to help keep that ball in the air and hold its line. So moving on to some of the lower spinning drivers. Now, if you're someone with a bit more swing speed, or you're simply looking for a more penetrating forward ball flight that doesn't have that risey flight, these are going to be for you. So the lowest spinning driver of anything I tested was actually the PXG Black Ops Tour. Now it is a carryover product, so it's been out a little bit longer than some of the rest of it, but it is still very much a current inline product for 2025. Now I could barely spin this thing over 1900 revs. In fact, my average spin was 1848 revs per minute. And alongside this sort of very low spin profile, as you'd imagine, it produces a very penetrating ball flight, but it's also a great sounding and feeling driver. So that's a really good option in this category. Now my next lowest spinner was the TaylorMade Qi35 LS. just slightly above 1900 revs per minute for me, so really aggressive on spin. And it's already in the bags of players like Colin Morikawa, Tommy Fleetwood, and that pear-shaped profile will really suit a lot of players' eyes and their flight requirements. The third lowest spinner for me was the Cobra DS Adapt LS. Now this one actually did get me above 2000 revs on average, so 2008 revs per minute. It's really similar to the dark speed of last year, but we know with this Future Fit 33 adapter, there's going to be a lot more options in terms of dialing yourself in. So this is a big one, carry distance. Everyone wants to maximize how far they're going to carry their driver. And the driver that produced the longest average carry for me was the TaylorMade Qi35, the core model. And that's quite a familiar story from last year where the TaylorMade Qi10 core model did the same for me. The tech story is a little bit different this year. They focus very heavily on CG or CG projection to help produce that high launch, low spin ball flight that we know equates to distance. And from the statistics, it seems to have been working. In second place for me in carry distance was the Srixon ZXi. Again, the core model, not the LS model, but the core model. And that was coming in at 297.2 on average for me. And there's a lot to love about this standard ZXi driver, not least the impressive carry distance it produced for me. It's got classy looks. It's got no confusing or flashy marketing. It's just exceptionally good product that is clearly producing good performance. And in third place to me, this was a little bit of a surprise, but a pleasant one, the Wilson Dynapower LS, 294.7 yards on average. That's right, Wilson in the top three. And for me, the Dynapower LS was just a rocket ship. The whole Dynapower metals range was a very pleasant surprise for me this launch season. However, I will caveat this one. If you do miss right, as a general rule, I'd steer clear of this Dynapower LS because it has got quite a prevalent inherent fade bias. So you might want to bear that in mind despite how pokey it is. Before we move on from the data section, I've got a couple of other drivers that I would like to mention. Now, they're very much at a niche end of the market, which is why I've left them out of the main table, because the data would be somewhat compromised simply from the radical specs of these drivers. But I think they both have a place for a certain type of driver. And the first one of those is actually kind of from a package set. It's the PXG Wildcat driver. Now, you can buy this driver individually, which is why I've brought it up, and you can buy it for under $300. And the reason I want to talk about this is the spec is, as I said, quite different. It's got 16 degrees of loft. It's 44 inches long, so quite a bit shorter than standard, and comes in a C6 swing weight, which is very light and easy to maneuver. So for someone who struggles to get the ball airborne, who's someone who's lacking a little bit of speed, this could be an absolute godsend. So I really think this is worth a mention. And if you are someone that fits into that category, this really is worth a look. Now, the second driver I want to talk to you about is right at the other end of the spectrum, and anyone who saw me play a PGA tournament with Bryson DeChambeau's clubs will be familiar with the Crank Formula Fire driver. Now, you might be thinking this is very niche, and you would be absolutely correct, but I've done enough fittings in my time to know there are players out there with extremely high club head speeds, and no matter what you do for them in fittings, no matter how much you loft down a more conventional driver, or you go into those low launch, low spin profiles of shaft and ball, they still really struggle with excessive spin. And Crank, as well as making a really nice looking and feeling driver, are one of the few companies that do very, very low lofts. You can go as low as 4 degrees in the Formula Fire range. So I know it's niche, but there'll be people out there who want to know about this. So if that's you, I've got you covered. So on to the bang for your buck category. Now, this is a new one, but it's been born out of necessity because now more than ever, we're all looking to make sure our money stretches as far as possible. So I wanted to find out which drivers are offering us the best value for money in terms of distance. So what I've done is I've taken my average carry distance with each driver and divided it by its dollar retail price to find out how many yards I'm getting per dollar. And here are the results. As you can see, Tour Edge has absolutely smashed it in this category, with the C725 coming in first, giving me a whopping 0.73 yards per dollar, and the E725 offering me a generous 0.7 yards for every dollar. Now, while this is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek category, as there's a lot more that goes into defining performance than something like this, I think it's a really good way of highlighting just what value for money there is out there with products like Tour Edge. Forgiveness now. Now, every manufacturer always tells us they've got the most forgiving driver. Wherever you hit it off the face, it's going to keep going. It's going to provide you great downrange dispersion and great distance. But it's a very difficult one to prove or quantify because all mishits aren't born equal. Even if you can somehow miraculously get the same amount of mishit, millimeters towards the toe or heel or high or low from strike to strike, the chances of you doing that with the same delivery of path, attack angle and clubhead speed are almost zero. So it is a really difficult one to quantify. However, it hasn't stopped me trying. So I have come up with an equation. I have taken all the data from my multiple testing sessions, and what I've done with each driver is I've taken the difference between my longest and my shortest drive, and I've added that to the difference between my most left and most right drive and divided it by 2 to create a number. So it's worth noting here, the lower the number, the more forgiving the driver in my equation, and here are the results. So as you can see from the chart, the TaylorMade Qi35 Max, well, frankly blew everything else out of the water to an extent. Certainly in my testing, not only was this comfortably the straightest driver I've used in many, many years, it also was pretty impressive on the distance output. It came out 4th overall. So when you combine those two parameters, you've got a really impressive driver there. And clearly from the chart, it's doing a good job of retaining that yardage and accuracy over a longer test period on some of those misstruck shots, which inevitably we all get. Ping also doing a really good job there with 2 out of the top 3 drivers, which those of us who've used Ping equipment over the years, that will be absolutely no surprise to. So there we have it. I hope the information in this video has provided you with a bit of insight as to what driver might best suit your game and where to begin your search for a 2025 driver. But the time has come for me to name what I'm going to put in my bag and what my personal favourite of the year is. But before I do, I have to mention one particular driver, and that's the Tour Edge Exotics C725. I hadn't done much testing with Tour Edge before, and the feel, the looks, the explosive distance, and the value on offer here absolutely blew me away. So I couldn't end the video without making a special mention to that driver. There are 2 that I rankled with between TaylorMade models, so the Qi35 Core and the Qi35 Max. As you saw from the data, the Qi35 produced my longest carry, and the Qi35 Max produced incredible accuracy and some really good distance to go along with that, a really good combination. So some of you might be surprised to know that I'm not picking either of those. The one that's going to be going in my bag for 2025, or the start of it at least, is the Callaway Elite Triple Diamond. It performed so well across a broad spectrum of those categories, and overall I found it workable, it felt great, and it had explosive distance. So that's what's going in my bag. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you're new to the channel, please hit the like and the subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.